All right, well, my clock shows noon, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Carrie, if you could start the recording, that would be great. Welcome to everyone. Let's go ahead and start my timer here. We are so glad you could join us today. For those of you who don't know, my name is Liz Hill, and my co-host today is Carrie McLean. We both work in the CU Boulder Ombuds office, which offers confidential, impartial, and off-the-record consultations and services for all faculty and staff and students. So today's Lunch and Learn topic, hopefully you can all see my screen here, is dealing with porcupines, managing high conflict people. All right. So before we get started, we're going to just go over a few logistics. Some of you have been here before, so you know how this works, but we are going to ask that you stay muted and kindly keep your video off to reduce distractions. We may use polls and ask questions throughout the presentation, and so if you haven't already, please go ahead and open that chat box now. And this is what you'll use to respond to any questions that I may ask, as well as to ask any questions you have. Of course, as probably most of you know by now, your name does appear when you use the chat box function. So we just want to make sure you are aware of that. While I am presenting, Carrie will field any non-substantive questions and park any of those that are related to today's presentation in a parking lot until we get to the Q&A period at the end. And of course, if anyone has a specific situation they want to discuss and is not comfortable using the chat box, please go ahead and contact us in the Ombuds office and we can schedule a separate presentation or a consultation. Because we really do aim to keep these presentations at about 30 minutes. We're really trying to give you those bite-sized amounts of information and then get you back to your day. We are recording this session, and we do that in an effort to reach as many people as possible, including those who are unable to attend at this time. And later today, after the presentation, I will send a follow-up email that'll have links to references I may make, resources. There'll be a feedback survey link, as well as a link to the recording. So you will receive that later today. And Carrie will provide some of the links to resources as we go through today's presentation. Okay, so without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video as well. And then we will dive right in. All right. So the objective for today is to learn how to use a model that's called BIFF, B-I-F-F. And we use this model to effectively respond to hostility and bring any tense exchanges we're experiencing to a quick conclusion. And as I suspect, most of you have been on the receiving end of these hostile comments and behaviors and know that they can really show up anywhere. They can show up in emails, they can show up in letters, social media, and of course in person. So if you have that toolbar at the bottom of your screen and are able to go over to the reaction button, I'd like to see with some thumbs up, how many of you have been on the receiving end of a hostile or personal attack? Go ahead and use that thumbs up button if you can find it. Yeah. And I'm just going to bring up my, so I'm looking here. I'm just kind of scrolling through all of you. Yeah, I see quite a few. So I think you probably know what I'm talking about here. And so unfortunately, and I talk about this in any of my conflict related presentations, the question isn't about, how do we prevent conflict or how do we prevent hostile interactions? Because that's not realistic, right? It's inevitable. We can't control other people. The question is, how do we effectively manage them? And some questions that might pop into your mind is, do you ignore them? Do you react in like, kind, hostile tone? Or hopefully you're asking yourself, is there a better way? So our roadmap for today is we're going to talk about this BIFF model and review those 4 elements of BIFF, B-I-F-F, and then we're going to discuss when to use it, go through some practice scenarios, and then open it up for Q&A. So first, what is BIFF? BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And we will, of course, go through each of these separately in more detail. But I do want to give you our first resource for today. And I know Carrie's going to put the link in the chat in a moment here. But this is all based on a book by Bill Eddy. and it's called BIFF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People. And if you haven't heard of Bill Eddy, and some of you may have, he's an attorney. He's also a licensed social worker, mediator, and the co-founder of the High Conflict Institute. So if you want to Google that and go to his website, he's got lots of great information there as well. So let's just go through the four elements of BIFF, and then we'll talk more about, when would you use this kind of a response. So BIFF is first brief, right? You want to keep it short, typically a paragraph, 2 to 5 sentences. Even, and this is the hard part, even when the comment you might be responding to goes on and on for paragraphs, pages, or more. But by doing this, you're leaving much less for the other person to react to. And it's often all you really need. It's often sufficient to really get your point across. And of course, if you are doing it in writing, it's always a good idea to have someone else review it if appropriate. Now, if it's verbal, it's going to be a little trickier, but I encourage you to give yourself some time, right? Take some of those deep breaths. Give yourself a few seconds before deciding how to respond. Because the goal here, why we're using BIFF, is to avoid triggering defensiveness and focusing the other person on the problem-solving information. What is the issue and what's going to help solve the issue, right? The more you say, the more you open yourself up to the likelihood that they will either use something you say against you, right, and continue to berate you or act in a hostile manner, and likely to trigger that person to behave more in that way. So keeping it brief doesn't give them as much ammunition, so to speak. The second piece is the informative piece. And this is really giving people straight information. You're not getting into the emotions, you're not sharing your opinions, you're not getting defensive, you're not arguing with them. You don't need to, and we'll talk more about this when we get into when you use this, but you don't need to defend yourself when the other person is being hostile. I know that's our initial reaction, and it might feel good in the moment to do that, but it's not serving the purpose of disengaging and diffusing this situation. So when people are behaving in this manner, it truly is not about you. It's typically about them and their inability to manage their emotions and responses. So staying focused and providing the relevant information is going to be your best plan of attack. It might be providing a sentence or two, of this straight useful information on whatever the subject is being discussed, and keeping it objective and neutral. Because really your goal here is to shift the conversation. You're trying to get out of the emotion and focus again, or refocus the conversation on an objective subject matter, not opinions, not emotions, not personal attacks or blaming. The third element of BIFF is what we call friendly. And, you may be thinking, friendly? Why would I want to be friendly when someone's attacking me? And this is hard to do, and it may seem hard to do when you're being attacked, but it avoids feeding the hostilities, right? And it could potentially even calm an upset person and really help diffuse the situation. So, a friendly greeting or friendly closing, nothing too involved, but it does help keep the hostilities from escalating. And it shows that you have good self-restraint, right? You're taking the higher road here. So an example might be starting out saying something like, thank you for sharing your opinion on this subject, or I appreciate your concerns. Or if it's an email, you could say, thanks for your email. And then you might end it with a friendly comment. And be cautious here. You don't want your sign off, if you will, to be perceived as sarcastic or snarky, right? But if you think it might be interpreted properly, you could say something like, I hope you have a good week, or a nice weekend, or I wish you well. But of course, using your discretion and judgment given the situation. And then the fourth component is firm, right? And again, we're trying to disengage, we're trying to de-escalate, disengage, and put an end to this conversation. So firm is, at the end of the conversation, rather than you're trying to put a firm closing on it rather than feed more hostilities and just invite more attacks and more comebacks, right? But it doesn't mean harsh, so we will talk about that a little bit. The objective is to avoid anything that's really going to open the door to more hostile comebacks, right? Makes sense. So saying something that calmly ends, and it makes it clear to the person that you are ending this conversation. And if you can't end it here, and I know many of you are in situations where you're going to have ongoing relationships, or you might need, more information. If you cannot end it there because you do need some kind of a response, or you need information from this person, keeping it simple with yes or no questions that, really just invite a yes or no response, or being very specific about what you need and when you need it, and then ending on a friendly note. Because again, the goal is to end the conversation and disengage, right? So the message to the person is that this is all you're going to say on this subject, and being clear about any expectations. And being clear, I should add, about any consequences. So what does that look like? An example could be, please provide X by Friday. If I do not receive the information by then, I will have to cancel the appointment. I really hope that won't be necessary. So that might be an example of ending it unfriendly and firm, even when you do need them to do something, okay, so that you can do whatever it is that you need to do. So those give you a little insight into the 4 elements of BIFF. Now, the question is, when do you use this technique? When would you use this style and approach? So as you might have guessed, it's not going to be for every conversation, right? We're talking about situations where you're trying to de-escalate tension, contain the other person, disengage. It's a strategy for managing situations with what might be deemed a high conflict personality or a high conflict person. This is someone, or really anyone for that matter, who is showing unmanaged emotions and extreme behaviors. Particularly, this is used after you've already tried to have a reasonable, rational approach, right? You've already tried to connect with them with empathy. You've used your communication skills. You've given them their attention and demonstrated respect. You've analyzed available options. You've responded to any misinformation they might have. And you've already tried to set some limits on their behavior. And yet they keep coming back with attacks, with blaming. They're making it personal. It's no longer about the issue. Okay. And for those of you on the call who do want to know, what is this high conflict personality or person, I'll just share with you that it's typically, and it's really outside the scope of today, but it's typically defined as someone who is an all or nothing, thinking. Everything's black and white. There's no gray. There's no other possibilities or perspectives, right? It's really very to them, very cut and dry. Someone who has unmanaged emotions, someone who has extreme behaviors, someone who constantly blames other and really can't recognize their contribution or their role in the conflict or in the situation. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But the beauty is you don't have to diagnose. You don't have to determine whether someone you're dealing with, does rise to the level of a high conflict personality or is a high conflict person. You can use it with anyone who is demonstrating the inability, right, to deal with this issue or to deal with this conflict. Someone who's demonstrating to that they lack self-awareness, that they're being aggressive and they're escalating the conflict, or they're constantly preoccupied with blaming and attacking. That's plenty to know that maybe a BIFF response is going to help you. And I would say, as a side note, even if you suspect they're a high conflict person or a personality, you probably don't want to mention that to them. Okay, so before we get to our first scenario, I just want to, emphasize and reiterate that the purpose of BIFF, is again to avoid triggering defensiveness, because the more you do that, the more they just keep coming back. So essentially, you're containing the high conflict person's behavior. You're not trying to, make them see the light or compel them to your point of view or control their overall behavior. You're really disengaging from the blaming behavior. And a couple things just to keep in mind, and unfortunately, we don't have time today to go into examples for each, but I just want to plant the seed that, as you're thinking through a BIFF response, some questions you might want to, consider, and this will help inform, how friendly you are, how firm you are, how much information you give, you know, it'll really set the tone for the tone for your response is, you know, are you trying to manage a relationship? Are you trying to reduce a relationship, right? Or are you trying to flat out end the relationship? Because that will definitely change your BIFF response. So, you know, asking yourself questions of, you know, will my response engage this person more in my life? Will it allow them to save face and back off without more defensiveness? Will it end, you know, will it successfully end the relationship? Okay. All right. So we are going to go through a scenario here. And, you know, I get that we have faculty on the line, we have staff, we have students. So, you know, obviously these scenarios aren't going to maybe, specifically apply to your life or your situation. So feel free to, you know, change the characters, maybe change the facts that make sense for you. But just keep in mind, they are just that, you know, hypothetical scenarios just to practice. Okay, so here's our first one. You are the chair of the Department of Micro Practices. You receive an email from a very irate parent. The parent is complaining about a class their child is taking from your Nobel laureate in micro practices. The parent exclaims, in all caps, of course, that if the faculty member knew how to teach their child would not be failing the class. You professionally respond to the parent with empathy and respect, and you ask clarifying questions to better understand the situation. The parent, however, replies, insisting that you are an incompetent clown, and they reiterate how much money they are paying for their child to go to school here. The parent wants results and threatens, if you know what's good for you, you will make sure my kid gets an A. All right. So here's one possible BIFF response, and you will get a chance to do your own as well in a moment, but I just want to give you an example of what this might look like. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm not saying it couldn't be done differently. This is just one example. Dear irate parent, thank you for your email and for bringing these concerns to my attention. We value quality instruction and student success here at the University of Colorado Boulder. I will ensure your student is aware of and has access to all available resources. Best wishes. Okay, so in the chat box, I'd love some feedback, you know, so I know we're going quickly here, we have limited time, but based on what we've talked about so far, you know, just, you know, give me your thoughts. Is it brief? Is it informative? Is it friendly? Is it firm? What do you think? Okay, thank you. I see some responses coming in. Okay, so someone, yes, don't say irate, good point. Yep, maybe use different words, sure. Could be more firm, okay. Brief and firm. Leaves no room for additional interaction. So I guess to that one, the leaves no room for additional interaction. The question is, what's your goal, right? Are you looking to further engage with this parent, or are you trying to end it? You know, and so definitely how you phrase this will depend on what that goal is. And it doesn't provide any specific information. Yes, I would agree with that too. That's one thing that I thought about as I was drafting this, is maybe you could, you know, include one or two more statements of some specific, you know, things or resources that the student could use to improve their grade. Yeah, a little bit more informative. I would agree. Sure, great. This is all really great feedback. Thank you. Yes, and they, of course, yes, they could absolutely come back with, it's not my kid's fault. You may not successfully end this if that was your goal, to end this. There may still be room for argument. Yeah, but you're not addressing the threat, right? You're not engaging in that, you're not interacting with that, with the threats or the emotions or the attacks. And that's really kind of what I'm trying to get at here. So thank you. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going, but thank you. That's excellent feedback. And I'm sorry if I didn't comment on yours, but I think all the feedback I'm seeing as I scroll through is excellent. And someone said ends a convo. Yes. And when I was doing that, that was the goal, right? That's what I had in my mind. I wanted to end this. I did not want to further engage because, you know, in the scenario, I'd already tried that. I already tried to engage with this parent by asking questions and trying to get information, and it turned into a personal attack. So, okay, but that would come into play, right? Are you trying to engage them, or are you trying to end it? Okay, so two more things I want to touch on before I give you a scenario to try on your own. Bill Eddy in his book, BIFF, also talks about avoiding the 3 A's, and they are advice, admonishments, and apologies. So advice meaning, are you telling the other person how to deal with a problem or what to do or how to deal with it in a particular way? Because when you're dealing with these kinds of situations and these types of people who are in this state of mind, this is almost always going to trigger a defensive and attacking response. So unless the person you're dealing with specifically asks for your advice, it may be better not to give it, especially if your objective is to end the conversation. The second one is admonishments. Are you speaking to the person like a parent telling a child how to behave? Because as many of us probably know, that doesn't work well. I may still do it, but it doesn't work well. So when people are feeling defensive, the last thing they want is for you to tell them that they're doing something wrong, behaving badly, etc. So the point of the BIFF response is to truly try to de-escalate the conversation without triggering another defensive response. And then finally, apologies. And I know this might sound counterintuitive, because generally, apologies are a good thing if they're done effectively. They're a good thing. However, when you're dealing with these kinds of situations that we're talking about and these kinds of people who are, again, in this frame of mind or in this space, most likely the tendency is they're going to use whatever apology you offer, even in good faith and with the best of intentions, against you. They're not going to accept them graciously. So, especially if it's a substantive apology that blames you for the situation. For example, I'm sorry I shouldn't have done such and such, or I'm sorry, I guess my strategy failed, or I'm sorry I hurt you by doing X, Y, and Z. These are most likely going to be turned and used against you as another way for this person to try to prove, what, it really is all your fault. Now, that said, social apologies may work. Okay, and so again, you're going to have to use your judgment and discretion. For instance, I'm sorry if you were a few minutes late. I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late to our meeting. Or I'm sorry you are in this difficult situation. Now, some of you may, if I were to open up the chat box again, somebody would say, oh my gosh, those are still going to be used against you. And you're absolutely right. They may be. There's no guarantee, right? We can't control other people. But there may be a time and a place for these kinds of apologies, again, using your discretion. And then there's always the question of, like, do I respond? Do we have to respond? Again, these are situations we've already tried to engage in a productive, professional, respectful way. We've already tried to empathize and provide options and provide information, and yet they keep coming back with these attacks and this hostility. So there may be times when it's just time to stop. And here are some examples of when that might be, especially if no one else, if they're not CCing the world or CCing other people that you're trying to demonstrate to, that you are trying to manage the situation. At some point you may say, I'm just done. I'm not going to engage with this person anymore. Or if there's really no issue being discussed, now it's just emotions and personal attacks that we're not even discussing what the original issue was. Again, same thing here, their opinions, their behaviors, if that's what the focus is, it's probably time to end the conversation. Or if they're no longer hearing you, right? If they can't hear you, there's probably not much more you can do. And if you've already responded sufficiently, so if you've given them the information they need to either resolve their issue or to take it to the next, whatever that next step might be, you probably don't need to respond any further. So essentially, I would say the bottom line is, if there's nothing left to add or to say, it may be best to just stop. Okay. And again, it's going to be a judgment call, and, you might want to prepare your supervisor, knowing that this person may then escalate to the next level, but it may be time for you to disengage. Okay. So let's practice. I'm going to go ahead and put up a scenario. I know you're probably tired of hearing me, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. But feel free to, read along on your own. And then I'm going to, and while you're doing that, take out a pen, paper, whatever you use, because I'm going to have you just jot down some thoughts on how you might respond to this one. So you're working under some tight grant application deadlines. And again, this could be any scenario that makes sense for you, right? Okay. Your colleague, Moaning Myrtle, knocks on your door. You know that they want to, yet again, complain about other department members. You sigh and answer the door. Moaning Myrtle starts in right away. Did you hear the latest development? Susie, who we know is having an affair with the chair, got preferential treatment for their merit raise. When Moaning Myrtle stops to take a breath, you say, Moaning Myrtle, I'm sorry, I'm really under a deadline here. Moaning Myrtle then turns on you. You're taking their side. I knew it, you conniving snake. I bet they gave you preferential treatment for your merit too, for keeping quiet about the affair. Okay, so the first question is, do you respond? Okay, and I'm gonna put up a poll here to see how many of you would even respond at this point. So go ahead and answer that. Would you respond to Moaning Myrtle? Because as you might have guessed, the next thing is if you said yes, okay, take a few moments to consider what might you say? How might you respond to this? And I'm looking at the poll. Thanks for doing this. You guys are awesome. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Yes. Interesting. Okay. All right. Give you a couple more seconds here. So I'm going to end it and go ahead and share with you the results. All right. So 62% of you said yes, you would respond, and 38% of you said no, you would just kind of ignore her or him and hope that they go away. So for those 62% of you that would respond, I'm going to give you a few moments. I know we're at 26 minutes, but I want to give you a minute or two to think about how might you respond. And then if you're brave enough to share your response with the group, give me a all capital yes in the chat box, and we can take you off mute to read your response. If not, no worries. But just take a moment to think about this. Okay, good. I have some volunteers. Excellent. And to the two of you who volunteered to give a response, are you ready now, or do you need more time? Okay, all right, Megan, you were first. So Megan, you're our winner for today. I'm gonna go ahead and try to find you here. Carrie, help me out here. Try to find you and unmute you. It looks like this is in alphabetical order, so it should only take me a second. Megan Peressa, there you are. Unmute. All right, Megan, how would you respond to Moaning Myrtle?
Elizabeth, so glad I'm the winner here today. It's very so I think I would respond, but to disengage. And I think I would say, Moaning Myrtle, I'm not going to engage with you about these conversations about our colleagues. I do need to return to work on my project, but I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Okay. So let's use our thumbs up feed. Thank you for that. Let's use our thought. How many people think that would effectively address the situation? Go ahead and use your bottom toolbar reactions. Give us a thumbs up. Let me take a look here, see how many. Okay, good. I see lots of thumbs up. You're getting some good validation here. All right. Anyone who doesn't think it would be effective, anyone want to share their thoughts, feel free to use the chat box. Either way, why you think it'd be effective or why you don't think it'd be effective and what you might do differently. Okay, and I'm getting some private responses, which is fine. I will not share your names. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it is possible she'll escalate, right? That's always a risk. We can't control other people, but we can do our best to try to, de-escalate the situation and put an end to it. All right, and it sounds like this person has a relationship, right? They have a relationship. So maybe they can be a little bit more candid and frank with each other and to the point. Okay, so I realize we're, yes, thank you everyone for the feedback. Yes, and Megan, if you could just mute yourself again, that would be great. So I'm gonna go ahead, let's see if I can do this. Let's just keep going here. So yeah, so here was a possible, BIFF response. I'm not going to read it, but you can read it for yourselves. And I like Megan's as well, right? And so, it's really you're gonna use your own personal style here to a large extent. But the key is, and I'll leave that up for a second, is to really just remember, is it brief? Asking yourself, is it brief? Is it informative? Is it friendly? Is it firm? And, your relationship with this person is going to, you know, come into play and make a difference. Again, your goal for what you're trying to accomplish is going to come into play. All of these things are going to be factors for sure. Okay, and I see, yeah, I see some private comments, so we can talk about those. Thanks, Peter. Now, please, Peter likes the now, for now, please kindly close my door as you leave. Okay. Okay, and the friendly part, so someone had mentioned, you know, they were concerned the friendly part is a total lie. It's, you know, I would say it's not that it's a lie. I would say that you are trying to manage the situation, right? And we can all be polite and respectful without actually liking someone, right? Or, you know, for the sake of professionalism, right? And for the sake of ending things on a more positive note. But I'm happy to talk more with people about these concerns if you want to give us a call. Okay, and she said, thanks, that helps. Okay, good. Okay, so it's really, you know, it really boils down to being professional, being respectful, and, you know, not being on the receiving end of this hostility, right? And engaging with these people who are just going to blame and attack. Okay, so again, the idea is to calm the conflict, not to escalate it, restrain your urge to attack back, stop the hostile conversation, don't get in the mud yourself, just keep it brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So before I go to Q&A, I do know we're over time, so if you need to hop off, I totally get it. We appreciate you being here. If you can stay on, great. I will stay on for a few more moments. Again, if you need to contact us, here's our information. Carrie's going to put all these links in the chat box. I'm going to include them all in my follow-up email. So have no fear, you will have this information. Okay, so questions, thoughts, comments, feel free to use the chat box for this. I'm going to move it over here on my screen so I can see it. And for those of you who are hopping off, thanks again for coming. You know, we so appreciate your support and you being here. And these are all recorded and available on our YouTube channel. So yes, thank you, Carrie, for reminding people. Kate says, how do I ensure I don't accidentally hit her when I close my door? Well, I think you're asking her to close the door, so hopefully that isn't an issue. We don't want to be physically hitting anybody. All right, I love the comments. Thank you all so much. And yes, and look for our next presentation, which Carrie, I don't know if Carrie's going to put a link, but if you go to our website under Lunch and Learns, we do have presentations coming up. We have one in October and one in November already scheduled. So we look forward to seeing you there. The next one is De-escalating tensions, flight, fight, and the communication option on October 27th. And then how to disagree with powerful people will be offered on November 17th. And I kind of feel like I sound like a commercial. So I think that's a good place to end. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.